At Penji is our commitment to helping those who are making sacrifices to help others. Thank you to those making a difference in your community. We are currently accepting applications for Penji for nonprofits. If you know a nonprofit or you are one yourself, head over to penji.co and click on Penji for Good at the bottom of the website to learn how to qualify. If you are listening to this podcast and are not a nonprofit, well, welcome. Become a customer by using the custom coupon code within the podcast show notes. Proceeds of all sales goes directly back to the nonprofit from this interview. Now, back to the show.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Unified Purpose. You know what we do in this podcast? We talk about inspiring tales of compassion, resilience, community spirit to kind of give you guys some inspiration. I'm your host, Daniela, and I'm Penji's Partnership Coordinator. And today we have a very special guest, Kristin Connor from Cure Childhood Cancer. Hi, Kristin. How are you?
Thanks for having me.
No, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. I'm so excited. And to kind of get the ball rolling, break the ice a little bit, why don't you introduce yourself to us and tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, everything that we got to know about Cure Childhood Cancer, the whole shebang.
Okay. I am the CEO of Cure Childhood Cancer, which is a nonprofit based in Atlanta that focuses 100% on kids with cancer. And our mission is to really advance research into better, effective, less toxic treatments for children with cancer, while we also support families that are going through the very difficult experience of childhood cancer. I have been here for 19 years, came to this work after I was a lawyer practicing business litigation here in Atlanta. And then my youngest was diagnosed with cancer as a newborn back in 2001. And that experience was, one of those life-changing experiences that really changed the trajectory of my life and really led me to need to be involved and really doing something to help these children. So that led me here, and I've been here for a long time now.
That's incredible. I think what I can't believe is that you sort of, I imagine that getting, newborn baby diagnosed with cancer is completely life altering. I feel like it's one of those experiences that you see people go through all the time, and you always think it's not going to happen to me until it does, right?
Right. Absolutely. I mean, I think you're right. I think you never expect anything like that to happen. I certainly didn't. And it does turn life upside down a bit. And it certainly opened my eyes to, a crisis that I was sort of something you read about and not experience yourself with your own child. And I just have needed to really lean into helping.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that your child is doing a lot better now. I think that's like the dream for most parents. What I'm, curious about is that before you did all of this, you were working as litigator.
Yeah.
And I'm curious in how that sort of background has affected your work now with everything that you're doing with Cure, and just in general, like with healthcare. Do you think that influenced your approach, or were they just completely unrelated?
Well, I think they were completely unrelated. I was doing business litigation, as you said, and it had nothing to do with healthcare at all. But I think that my training as an advocate, really in law, that's what you are, is you're an advocate for your clients. And so I think the training that I had, both in law school and, and then 10 years of practicing really did prepare me for this. I think it taught me how to be a really strong and thoughtful and strategic advocate. And I've been able to apply, those skills to this to this problem. I don't like the word cause because that just feels like it's not a cause. It's these are children, and so but I do think that it's equipped me to be able to really advocate on their behalf, and in some ways also, kind of like lead the organization and run a business, so to speak. I think all of those skills have served me well in doing this job.
Yeah, I think everything sort of always helps in the most interesting ways. For also I wanted to ask you, I think for parents who are going through this, right? That are finding out that their children have cancer, especially I would say like more aggressive forms, more terrifying forms of cancer that sound immediately like, oh, your kid is gonna die. Um, what is the best way to sort of approach the topic or try to manage or handle these situations that I think no one is really prepared for?
Yeah, and I think cancer is just a scary word for all of us. And I think that when you receive a diagnosis, it's always so shocking, and I think that it feels terrifying. I think most people don't come into it knowing like what is survivable and what isn't survivable, and I think it's just terror. Like, how can my child have cancer, and will they live? And so I feel like that is that terror is just such a common experience. And I think families go through, like parents go through a period of time where they're sort of in a fog. They're just processing and trying to understand, what they're facing. I think that, we really try to be there in those moments of crisis when they're just trying to get through the fog. And I think that typically what happens is they will process it, and then they will start to like settle into, okay, this is the fight, and this is what we have to do, for our child. I would say, my best advice to parents that are like in that moment is, to really reach out for support and help. And it's whether it's your closest friend group, your family, or an organization like I think it's so helpful and important to just have your like parlor of support around you, and not try to navigate through by yourself.
Yeah, I agree. I remember my grandfather had cancer, but I feel like in such a different situation because he was already, I think in his 80s once he got the diagnosis, and like to a degree, it's not that you ever expect someone to get cancer, but you expect at that age for people to start to get sick. Um, like a lot of people die in their 80s. Um, and I think it was still hard for my family to deal with. Like,
First, yeah.
even if yeah, even if he was an older man. And the entire journey until he passed away from, like, his diagnosis, right, until his death was really difficult, I think, because it keeps getting increasingly worse until there comes a point where they're like, "Yeah, he's not, gonna get better, so just, like, start preparing for the death." And I feel like it was a little bit more manageable because he was an older man. So my grandfather died at the age of 89. He died like a month before his 90th birthday. And I feel like it was kind of a needed death at that point because he was already, just kind of going through a lot of pain. The cancer was just like really bad on his body. And I can't imagine how that must feel when you're going through that with a child. Because I think at least with my grandfather, we had the comfort of thinking like, well, he had a long life. He was happy for most of it. Like it's time for him to go. But with a child that's, a baby hasn't barely lived, has their whole life ahead of them to have this diagnosis and then be taken away from the world, I think it probably is way worse for the kid, the parent, and everybody else that is sort of involved.
Yeah, well, first, I'm sorry about your grandfather. I do think we can all I don't know that there's anybody who isn't impacted by cancer, and it's a scary diagnosis at any age, and it's difficult. I have elderly parents right now, and who are having some challenges, and it's hard. I don't want to see them suffer, and either. But it is different with a child. I mean, I think my child was a newborn. They found his tumor when I was pregnant, 33 weeks pregnant. They found a tumor on his spine on an ultrasound, and, didn't know exactly what it was, but certainly they knew that cancer was a possibility. And I did not have any idea that a child could be born with cancer, like how, when this baby hasn't taken his first breath, can he already have cancer? It just didn't even make any sense to me. And so you've got this brand new baby that is totally defenseless, has not lived life at all yet. And how can this be how he's starting his life? And, I think the average age of a cancer diagnosis is 3 years old. Certainly older kids do get cancer, and teenagers, and that's a whole different difficult experience, and difficult for many reasons. And I think it's just so devastating as a parent, no matter the age. They didn't make lifestyle choices that might have contributed to their risk. I mean, they haven't had a chance to even really live yet, and so it feels very unfair. And I think also, when you're an adult, you're making decisions for yourself, in terms of what kinds of treatments you want to pursue. And but when it's your child, as a parent, you're responsible for making the best decisions you can for your child. And I think certainly for me as a mother, it felt incredibly scary and heavy to just so desperately want to make the best decisions for him, and being unsure what those were, and not wanting to, make the wrong decisions, and that might, saddle him with, lifelong effects from treatments or interventions versus, also, of course, your first concern is, will they live, and you want them to survive. And so I think it is really difficult. And certainly I've known many parents over the years who have lost their children. And I do think it's got to be, I believe, one of the hardest, most painful losses that anyone ever has to experience. So it is a difficult journey for sure.
Yeah, no, and I am so sorry that you or anybody has had to go through that, but I think it's really amazing that you were able to take this journey, and put it into the organization that you are in right now. I know you guys do a lot of scientific research. I know you put a lot of money, from that to sort of like try to find out what uh, happens with childhood cancer, like how to cure it, medicine and everything. And I think that's amazing because I think, like, I guess from something that was horrible, something great came out of. And it sounds like you guys are doing a lot to help a lot of these kids and these parents that are going through that. And hopefully, like, I think with stuff like diseases, like not just cancer, but just general illnesses, the future, or like the way to do better, is by doing research and, trying to figure out how to solve these problems, right?
Oh, absolutely. And research is the only way that we will, make progress in treating any diseases of any kind. And it's so important that we continue to invest as much as we can in science. So I'll say that first of all. And I think that one of the things that I learned, my son is doing well. He's 23. He's strong, healthy. He's great. And we are just beyond thankful that he has thrived. And so, but I have seen so many kids over the years, not have nearly the outcome that we've been so lucky to have. And one of the things that I learned when we sort of got, when we were going through it, it was about a 2-year journey. And before he was declared cancer free. And, when you're going through it, you're just surviving, and you're just one foot in front of the other, getting through the day. And that's what we did. But it was on the other side where I really started to process it and learn more that, cancers that affect children are biologically different from those that affect adults. And so they behave differently. They need treatments that are really designed for the biological diseases that they are. And the research that is specific to childhood cancers, there's very, very little funding for that. And that's been the case forever. Kids are kind of thrown in with the universe of cancer patients. And so, of course, it's an adult disease by and large. And so the funding sort of follows the numbers. So the world's largest cancer research source of funding is the National Cancer Institute under the NIH, National Institutes of Health, and that they less than 4% of their funding, research funding, goes to look at cancers that affect children. So it's a very tiny, tiny amount. And the other source of research funding are pharmaceutical companies, and because they are for profit and focused on profit, they don't invest in childhood cancer research because the market for the drugs just isn't big enough. So there's not enough profit potential. So it really comes down to private philanthropy to fund this research. And when I learned that, I felt like, oh my gosh, like, first of all, it shouldn't be that way. I think we should be looking at what are the things that really threaten our kids, and what are they? And, and then let's address those things. And cancer is the second leading death of children behind accidents. So I think as a nation, we should be doing more. And I felt like, hey, like, I wish I was a scientist. I wish my mind worked that way, but it doesn't. But what I can do is get out there and raise the money, at least some money, and funnel as much as I can to these people in the labs who can do the work to try to advance the science. And that's really what I've poured into, and that's my passion. And I really want to help families through the journey, but I want there to be a time when, every child is, yes, like a newborn diagnosed, but we're gonna cure this, and that every parent hears that, if they have to go through this, that there's
hope.
Yeah, they're going to survive this, and they're going to thrive afterwards, like my son has done. And so that's really what Cure is all about. And we have, since I've been at Cure, we've raised, this June we'll hit about $114 million, and we're putting as much of that as we can right into the labs where the scientists are working to advance these treatments and options. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think doing that, and I can't believe I actually thought more research went into childhood cancer.
I mean,
You would think.
I thought so too. I mean, I just assumed, right? And what happened for me was when my son was declared cancer free. It was, a date you never forget, November 2003. And I had met many other parents, and, in the halls of the hospital. And some of those are my best friends today, all these years later. And their kids were really struggling and suffering. And so I just started looking at, okay, like, who's doing what? And the first thing I did was just go to the, websites of the big national cancer organizations, and started looking for, like, okay, where's the drop down for childhood cancer, and like where they're going to tell me how they're doing. And those didn't exist back then. And I was like, hold on a minute, like, And, I really started leaning into learning like what are we actually doing, and I was totally shocked to find out that we weren't really doing much at all.
Yeah, no, I thought because I also feel like childhood cancer is such a it's not something really obscure, that nobody knows about, it's a type of illness that there's been tons of movies, tragic about kids getting cancer and dying. People have heard tons of stories. They have, the Make-A-Wish stuff, and with all of that, marketing, I wouldn't say marketing, but, just kinda, all of the, I guess, press that people children with cancer tend to get, I would imagine that that would mean that also a lot of research goes into it. I don't think I would have ever imagined that it's so little.
So little. And I think that um, one of the unfortunate truths is that a lot of people have some experience with it now. Like when I was growing up, I didn't know anyone who even knew anyone who had a child with cancer. And now incident, this is one reason why I feel like it's critical that we as a nation address this, because the incident rates have been climbing for the last 30 years. The incident rates have gone up 30% over the last 30 years. And so it's happening more and more and more. And I feel like in every community, right, there's a child. And whether it's, I feel like in most schools, there's either a child who has cancer, a sibling of a child who has cancer, a sibling of a survivor. There's some connection. And and so it's not so rare, anymore. And given that it is, certainly the leading cause of death due to disease in children, and it is such a threat to them. And not only, I think that what we need to be concerned about is not only the mortality rate, but also what happened with the survivors. When you mentioned your grandfather, when you are 70 or 80 years old and you're diagnosed with cancer, you really don't need to worry about the toxicity of the treatment and what that might lead to 20 years down the road, right? But
Yeah.
when you're talking about a child, we do need to think about that, and we do need to be concerned about that. And so how we cure them matters a whole lot more with a child, right? And I've been in this long enough now to see that the conventional treatments, the chemotherapies and radiation lead to secondary cancers, 15 years later. I've seen a lot of that where survivors, these kids survived and then 15 years later were diagnosed with a secondary cancer, and then they don't make it, or I've seen kids that need heart transplants in their 20s, things like that. And so it's just a different, it's just a different situation with the kids. And so we have to be really thoughtful about, how we're treating them and try to reduce the toxicity. And that's really, Cure is very focused on targeted therapies. And there's been so much progress in the last 10 years with precision medicine. So gene-based therapies that really target just the genetic mutations that are driving the cancer versus the whole body, right?
Yeah.
And that is something I'm really passionate about, because it gives these kids a chance not just at life, but at life with a very high quality,
Yeah.
Um,
A life worth living. I
yeah.
think like you said, because I remember, I think my grandfather's cancer is the closest I've been to someone with cancer in my life. But I mean, like I mentioned, I think it was handled so differently because he was an older man, and not, like a child. But I do also recognize how, he never got put through chemo because he was too old at the time. And just the doctors didn't think he could withstand it. So he did mostly radiations. And the radiations would be horrible on his body. Like the toll that they would take on him after just immediately were awful. And the doctors would always say that of like, well, you know, like this might cause other problems, but we'll tackle them later because the priority is to kill the cancer. And I think, like you said, like we were also very clear from the moment he got that diagnosis that he was he was going to die from this, right? Like I don't think anybody was expecting for him to survive it. It was more of just like giving him as much life as possible and the best quality of life until that moment came. Um, but then I put that into a child, and it's, I mean, so different because at least when you know that this is a person who has already lived a life, you know, like this is kind of the end, you can kind of work around that without concerning yourself about what their future is going to look like, or, you know, like if this is going to be bad for them or like do anything. And even when you're just concerning yourself with the immediate things, it's still really difficult. And I can't imagine, like, if you're doing this with a child, like, how are you going to? I've seen kids who get like limbs and body parts taken away from them because of cancer. And that's just, you know, your child is going to be their life is going to be changed forever if they don't have an eye because they got taken away from cancer, or if they had like a limb that was taken away, because now they will have to live a world where they're different than everybody else, right?
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's very true. And I think that the good news is the good news is these kids are incredibly resilient. I joke that they're way more resilient than the parents are, you know? I, you know, we were in a very, I guess, fortunate in some ways situation that he was so young that he doesn't remember any of it. I mean, he really doesn't have a memory of it. And, I will never forget, you know, any moment of it, but he doesn't remember. But I think even the kids that are older, I mean, they're very resilient. They do need support though. I mean, I think, you know, one of the things that we do at Cure is we provide counseling for the patients, the survivors, the siblings, the parents, because it is traumatic. It's such a traumatic thing. But those kids, they can go on and have great lives. And, you know, I worry very much about the effects of their public effects of the treatments that we're providing. And I want to see them get much more targeted, which we're really working hard on. And there's been, I mean, from the time since I started this, you know, 19 years ago to now, I mean, the progress has been, I mean, mind blowing. So I have tons of optimism that if we keep funding science, we will continue to improve the situation for these kids long term. And so I think that if we do that and we provide them with the support they need, the counseling and the support they need, that they really can go on to be resilient, happy, thriving adults. You know, that's the good news.
That's
And
crazy.
yeah,
No, I totally admire that. It really resonated with me when you said that your kid doesn't remember your son, but you remember everything. When I was younger, my sister had she was, I wasn't, I guess it's not a car accident. She was run over by, yeah, she was run over. She was 3 years old, by a car that was driving. Like it was a student who was going to college, and she was like speeding in a residential area because I guess she was late for class or something, and she ran over her. And this was really traumatic for my parents, right? Like my mom and my dad were there because they were like, we were at home, and they were like, they were getting ready to drive us to kindergarten, me and my sister at the time. I think I was maybe like 6 or 7. Um, and she was 3 years old. And she, like, it was really traumatic for them. They had to, like, obviously drive to the hospital like crazy because the ambulances were not going there. It was just like a whole thing. And when you ask me and my sister, we don't remember anything, you know, like she has a scar on her hand from like when she got run over, but that's pretty much it. And I think the trauma really stayed with my mom and my dad mostly because we don't remember much. And I think like it's a privilege in a way because that way I feel like as a kid, having to grow up with the weight of knowing that that happened to you probably would have been harder than if you just don't remember, right?
Yeah. Well, the trauma's not there for, thankfully, like you said, for you. And I'm so glad to hear that she's okay and that she, I mean, it is a blessing, that they don't remember. I think because I've stayed in this, my kids have seen a lot and I think they understand both of I have an older son. I mean, he was 3 years older and I think they both understand what could have been. And so I think they both are grateful and they've heard, but all, I mean, most of what they both know is just what we've told them. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm thinking like I think it's equally good for the kids. It's still really bad for parents. I think you should still always check in on parents. I think what's good with kids is like I think when you're young, I think up until maybe like 6 or 7, 8 years old, you don't really understand what's going on. Um, so I feel like a lot of times, even if something bad is happening, you don't understand like entirely what a diagnosis might mean, what that signifies for future things or whatever. And in a way, I guess ignorance is a little bit of bliss. Um, because it does help kind of kids not be so terrified. I think that that's kind of like, at least for me, I feel like that's a big difference because I feel like if I went to the doctor tomorrow and they were like, "Oh, you have cancer," I would be immediately terrified,
Right.
like, and I would very much understand the implications of that, even if I wouldn't understand the scientific things behind it because I'm an adult. Um,
Yeah. And I
yeah.
think, I mean, our kids, our older kids, and I'm saying older, what's the age? 7, 8, 10, 13. I don't know exactly, but it is a different experience for them. I think they do understand a lot more and the older you get the more sort of context I guess you have and but even the younger kids, I mean, even though they may not remember later, I mean we do see a lot like what it's one reason why we provide counseling to the siblings is because their worlds really are turned upside down. And so we have play therapists that will like you see sometimes with even younger siblings that, will really regress and maybe start having some behavioral issues because I mean their worlds are just turned upside down and their parents aren't around and there's just a lot and so I think that being able to offer that help, a lot of times families can't take advantage of it until they're on the other side of treatment. Like it's just too hard while they're going through. But I think it's important that families lean into counseling, like if they can access it. I mean, certainly we will help. And because sometimes it's years later when things kind of bubble up and our counseling is available for as long, I mean, it could be 10 years later, and just related to that cancer experience. But you'd be surprised at how things can come up and even the younger kids really can develop a lot of anxiety and resentment and fear and all kinds of things because of it. And so we do provide, we are one of the things that I love about Cure is that we really do stay with families as long as they'll stay connected to us. So I hope that the outcome is very positive and they can go on and live their lives and not need us anymore. But they're still our family and and with the bereaved families, I mean, we have a really strong bereavement care program and I mean, we're here forever, and we're not going to leave those families and we're going to continue to support them through
Yeah.
that journey of grief. And it's a tough experience, but you can get through it, you can. And so I don't want to be all doom and gloom at all.
No, I think it's very admirable. And I think that's actually a great note to end the podcast on. But before we end it, I do want to give you the space to tell people where they can come and find you if what we spoke about today resonated with them. If anybody is going through something like this and needs help or just wants to donate, work with you, whatever it is, space is yours.
Well, thank you. Well, you can find us, of course, online at curechildhoodcancer.org. We're also on all the social media, channels. And so just look us up there. It's Cure Childhood Cancer. And yeah, I mean, I think if there are families listening that are impacted, or someone who's impacted, please send them to our website, and that will guide them in terms of the resources we offer for them, and also how to get a hold of us. And we would love to connect with them and really help them through. Most of our team have been personally impacted, either as their parents or their siblings or their survivors themselves. And so we have a lot of insight into the experience, and I think feel like we can really try to help in very sensitive and practical ways too. And then, I think, yeah, I thank you for the chance to share with your audience that, this problem of childhood cancer it's a problem that gets bigger every year with these climbing incident rates. And I think that the great news is that we're just making so much progress, both in terms of developing therapies that utilize our own immune systems to attack cancer cells, which eliminates the toxicities for the kids, which, as we talked about, is so important. And then both that and precision medicine, where it's very, very targeted at the genetic mutations that are driving the cancer growth. So there's so much hope on the horizon. And I feel like the rate of progress is going to only accelerate with some of the, technological advances that we had, the real growth of AI. And so there's just kind of never been a better time to support research. And then I'll say, with what's going on in the country right now, and the cuts in funding for medical research, those are real. They're very much impacting our community. And we have seen labs that have had to stop their work. And if you can imagine stopping in the middle of clinical trials, your child is in a clinical trial, and then all of a sudden that trial shuts down because there is no more federal funding for it. It's a really tough situation. And so if you're able to support this research, then, we would love your support so that we can keep this going. These kids can't afford to go backward.
For sure. Thank you so much for this. And I totally believe in your work. Guys, you heard Kristin. Go support as much as you can. Thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. I will see you guys on the next episode. Like, subscribe, listen to us. Thank you again. Have a great day, everybody.
You've been listening to Unified Purpose, brought to you by Penji. Check out the show notes to learn more about today's guest. And to learn more about Penji, the human-first creative subscription service, head over to penji.co. And by the way, if you're still listening, it would mean the absolute world to us if you were to share this podcast with a friend and, of course, subscribe.